Oh, hey, what's up, everyone? Got a couple of minutes here and wanted to talk about what I don't know. Oh, that's weird. There's a bunch of Tom Clancy books here. I sell books on the side. So there you go. There's a bunch of hardcover Tom Clancy's if anyone wants them. Let's move this so no one thinks this is a Tom Clancy stream. One thing that I had here that I did want to show off, I was still about to make a video about it, but I thought, well, I can do it here. I talked about sort of everything related to the Tartakovsky Clone Wars in terms of promos and arts, things like that. I've done a bunch of videos about them, everything from, hey, what's up, Evan? How's it going, man? I've talked about like the promo posters and promo posters for the DVD releases. I've got, a French bus shelter poster for the first season, things like that. There's lots of things from the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, but only so many things that you can actually I think identify a complete list of everything related, both sort of official and promo and whatnot, and actually realistically sort of hope to track it down eventually. This is one of the random things that that you need to get to sort of complete that collection. It's a 12 by 18 poster, but it's lenticular. You can kind of see that here, I think, right? I think it's got a little bit of that kind of 3D sort of feel to it, right? Pretty cool. This was something you could buy from StarWars.com back in 2006. It's a fun image. Who doesn't want to see Padme, in the snow bunny outfit, right? There are only 500 of these made. And again, they're still surprisingly readily available. I don't know how well they were marketed. This company, I forget the name of the company. I think it was something weird like something like Mellow Smello or something, like, no joke. Put these out, but they put a bunch of things out related to like Revenge of the Sith and some things around this time too. So this was in some weird way, this was the only thing they did for the Clone Wars. So it was kind of like it was almost like a test or something, right? I'm speculating here, but it makes me think like this was like a licensee test for this company. Could they put this out, right? This was their one chance to do something with the Clone Wars in 2006. And then there was like a whole wave of like later Revenge of the Sith style posters, same thing, lenticular sort of 3D effect. But yeah, still got it here, still got a shrink wrap, still got the certificate of authenticity here, which actually indicates, I think, it doesn't actually give me a specific number, but you can sort of see that it's like one of 500. But yeah, so one of many, but not so many official releases related to the Tartakovsky Clone Wars. So I really do think at this point, I've got the sort of the full set, the complete range of everything sort of like official and promo. It's Vivid Vision, that's right. But but it's confusing. I think that there's a like a licensing parent company. So yeah, but Vivid Vision is, it's that may be the imprint of this company, of the licensee that did that poster. And there's a bunch of things. If you just look for Star Wars Vivid Vision on eBay or whatever, you're going to find a lot of the Revenge of the Sith era ones. You might still find this one too, which I think is cool. There was something else like this too. If this looks familiar to anyone, there were things that you still see at cons all the time that were much smaller, almost like postcard size, that were like pre-framed. Hey, what's up, Stevie? Good to see you. Sort of pre-framed from the Tartakovsky Clone Wars. You see one of Padme there. I think there's one of Grievous, or actually Dooku. There might be a Grievous one. Those are not these, right? Those are still relatively easy to find as well. You seem to see them like at every Star Wars con you go to. Yeah, this is just this random thing, 12 by 18, which makes it a little odd to like frame and find. I've got a bunch of portfolios for like 11 by 17. I'm gonna have to stick it in like the 17 by 22 or something, or actually no, probably just like the 1824. Anyway, what's up, Lance? Lance, the Rising Star, who I got on Matt Wilkins' stream, and I'm glad, Lance, that worked out. For anyone who didn't see a couple of nights ago, Matt Wilkins did a stream with Lance, who was not a Fandom menacer, and then a bunch of Fandom menacers. And the reason, Lance, I really wanted you to go on there is something I'd actually suggested to Matt a day before, when the original topic, and I was going to be on the show too. The original topic was something, and I didn't want to get into this topic. The topic was going to be something like something to the effect of, EU fans who don't feel like collaboration with like the Fandom Menace like is a good thing for the EU, right? And Lance, you and I have talked about that, and I thought, yeah, and I suggested to Matt that that he reach out to you, or whatever. And that's why I only got a little worried when you did get to go on, and it was a bunch of Phantom Menacers there who had already started cranking up, all of their all of their shtick, you know what I mean? We're already sort of like going after Disney, talking nonstop, So anyway, you did a great job. I'm glad you had a good time, and I hope you guys get to do more or collaborations together. So yeah, it was good to see you there. Um, there's a lot of good people on this stream, so I hope folks are following Holocron Keeper Evan. I hope folks are following Stevie B. I hope folks are following Lance's channel. There's a lot of good stuff happening right now. It's really neat. I feel like it's been a while since I've heard a lot of conversation about sort of the EU fandom, the EU movement, the movement to continue Legends along a parallel path to the new canon. But a lot of conversation around that has popped up very recently in some of my sort of Star Wars circles. And it's always interesting to reflect on this. There's always folks who are either hyper optimistic, hyper pessimistic. There are folks who, yeah, great. I mean, that would be helpful, I think. I think that'll be helpful because and I'm kind of getting to this in some ways, actually kind of aligns with this. I think as new folks come to the fandom, right, there may be mixed messages, right, just depending on how they've sort of entered, right? And so it's just helpful to sort of make those things clear. And I think ultimately make clear what it is that an EU movement inside the EU fandom actually means, right? I mean, the thing that's always so lost and gets lost first, I think, in any sort of community sort of that comes together to achieve some aim is ultimately what the aim is, right? It's the objective that almost immediately gets forgotten, right? Or sort of watered down by then, sort of a battle about tactics and strategies and things like that. And then everyone starts fighting over those tactics and strategies. In the process, forgets what they're even aiming at in the first place, right? And I think, in fairness, it's not easy for a fandom or a movement or a community to sort of like maintain a really clear sense of objective over time, particularly as it grows. Why? Because naturally, because lots of people have lots of different views about things, and that's great. That's what makes those communities really strong. But but a healthy conversation on what those objectives are from time to time is also necessary, right? And it's okay to disagree about them, and it's okay to actually try every tactic and strategy. And that's the whole point. You don't have to fight over which one is better than the other. Try them all. But it's helpful to align on what the main objective is, and I think ultimately the thing that, and this is something that, I talk to fandom ministers about all the time, and there's no hard feelings about it. Ultimately, the fandom minister has a different objective, if they even have one. It's not clear to me that there is one, right? It's not clear to me that there's one other than, at this point, to sort of just, and I don't mean this in a bad way, other than to sort of like monetize like criticism, monetize sort of like hate viewing or whatever, right? It's, and we're at a really, really, really weird point in our popular culture. And we've been going here for a while now where watching someone's criticism of something you haven't seen is now more entertaining than watching the original art. Now that may be an indictment of how bad modern pop culture and art is, right? Fair enough, right? But I think it's really important, particularly in that world we live in now, in the age we live in, to actually get really good at criticism, right? Because we need a lot more critics. We need a lot more skeptics, right? We need a lot more people sort of blasting through all the mess, And so it's, I guess time will tell what sort of corrosive effects the popularity of what the Fandom Menace and many other sorts of communities online are sort of doing to our capacity to critique, right? When you can predict what someone's going to say, then, but are still sort of like glued to the tube. I don't know how helpful that is, but whatever. If it's entertaining to you, then that's all that matters. If you get some utility from it, fine. But in terms of the EU movement, right, there is a clear objective, and the objective is, well, you could argue about this, right? I mean, I think there's things that are on a hierarchy sort of more or less sort of defensible or sort of identifiable or tangible, right? And at a meta level, people argue too about like, well, if some aim isn't achievable, in my opinion, then it shouldn't be the aim, right? But I think that obviously the end goal, success, is if we keep getting some occasional extensions of the expanding universe storyline alongside the parallel path. That doesn't mean we want old characters stuck into the new stuff, right? Right? Because think about how silly the reverse would be. We don't want Kylo Ren to end up in like, a continuation of like the legacy comics. That doesn't make any sense, right? We want a continuation, right? However that looks, right? And there's no need to sort of be super concrete about that. It doesn't have to be a new TV show or a new movie set in the EU timeline, or even a book. It could be an occasional story, an occasional one-off comic. And as I've argued for years too, maybe it's even something as simple as inviting some of the older authors from the pre-2014 era to simply contribute an essay at StarWars.com about where they would have wanted the timeline to go to help us sort of fill in some of the gaps. Just give us something, right? But I think at the baseline level, here's something that I think we can not only all agree on, but something that I actually think in some weird way is almost more important for the short to midterm than worrying about like whether we're losing like with every year that passes post 2014, it feels harder and harder to sort of maintain this hope, right, that we'll get something eventually right. But again, in the short to midterm, I think the most important thing is making sure that the EU doesn't disappear, right, from people's sort of consciousness, right? That you as an EU fan do what you can do to show how great the EU is to others who aren't as familiar with it, right? Whether that's people who are hardcore into the new stuff, who are losing their faith in the new stuff, whether it's people who are hardcore into the new stuff, who also just like the old stuff too, right? Whether it's younger people, a younger sibling, younger cousin, younger friend or whatever, right? Who's just getting into this stuff, tell them about it, right? And that's why, to me, one positive sort of anecdotal sort of data point about how I think things are moving in the right direction for the EU fandom is that I'm like, 300 years old, right? I've been doing this for a long time now, saw the decanonization coming years before, worried about it. And now, this many years past that point, there are now people on the chat right now who are much younger than me, but are discovering the EU, which is great, and are now sharing their love of it, right? Whether it's on social media, on YouTube, and the great thing too is it's social media is such a tiny little echo chamber. It's like you tend to think and I've seen critics do this over the years. They'll try and like add up the numbers for all like the EU Facebook groups or something and say, well, the EU fandom is really only this big because I can count this many subscribers, right? Well, there's obviously clearly a lot of problems with that sort of methodology, right? One important one being like not everyone's on social media. When you think about Matt Wilkins or something, right? Well, yes, he's on YouTube, but that's it. So he's not out there sort of like pushing this stuff on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. When you think about all the people like Matt Wilkins out there in the world who, whether they're old or young, don't care about social media, and good for them. Everyone out there is a potential expanded universe fan. In that regard, the aggregate demand continues to grow and grow with every year someone's born, right? There's a new potential sort of EU fan. So it's really, really encouraging to me, but also exciting and really thrilling actually to see how many, and I hate to sound like, like some old guy, believe me, I'm not trying to, I'm not some elder statesman. I happen to be old, right? My time has come and gone, right? It's really, really neat to see that there are other people doing this too. So that's really good. And so I think, again, if you think about objectives, right, you can argue about tactics, strategies, blah, blah, blah. There's just the only thing I know is that I've seen a real explosion recently of younger EU fans, not afraid to be vulnerable and to put their unpopular Star Wars opinions out there on social media, YouTube, what have you. And kudos to all of you. So that's really great. So I think being an EU fan means ultimately having to be both pessimistic and optimistic at the same time. I mean, you've got to be hopeful, but realistic. And I think you can sort of keep two sets of books in that way. And the thing that keeps me hopeful is, again, as I've just said, I think that there are clearly lots of people discovering this. And I think in fun ways too, that like, what's nice is here's an honest critique that anyone I think is entitled to make about the Fandom Menace, for instance, I'd use them as a foil for a moment. Whatever you'd say about the first wave of people in 2017, early 2018 doing Fandom Menace sorts of work, right? Great. Maybe they reacted to Last Jedi. They didn't like it, right? There were tons of great roastable moments in that movie, I hear, right? And there were tons of videos and content made about that sparked this new sort of little tribe online called the Fandom Menace. At this point, this many years down the road now, you've got third, fourth generation copycats, right? Who are boring, predictable, who provide nothing, who don't know much about Star Wars beyond what they read in Wikipedia. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that like one person's a better Star Wars fan than another. But in terms of what that community, say the Fandom Menace, is doing to sort of like perpetuate itself, well, you can start to see the photocopies of the photocopies starting to wear a bit thin, right? There was a danger, I think, within the EU fandom post 2014 of lots of people just looking for a couple of visible sorts of names and just repeating the opinions of those influencers. And I think you saw that. And I mean, one really, I won't give specifics, but one really funny thing I used to see is that there was one major sort of Star Wars influencer who would pronounce something a certain way, perhaps incorrectly, and you'd see lots of little minions going around pronouncing it the same way, right? Because clearly what that was telling me was like, they didn't know about this independently. They didn't know much about it. They're just parroting sort of talking points, right? That they're hearing. And that's dangerous, right? What's so exciting is there are a lot of young whippersnappers out there coming at me because they've got unpopular EU opinions, and they're not afraid to argue them. So they know their stuff. It's exciting. There's a healthy continuation. There's a new generation, and it's really, really cool. So I'm really behind on some comments here. I'm going to go back and take a look here. So this is great. You're going to be doing that. That's fantastic. You're going to call out Matt for associating with them. The whole Kelly Marie Tran thing was blamed on us because, yeah, I mean, I guess so, right? There was definitely that. I mean, the thing, for folks who don't remember, back when Kelly Marie Tran when she left social media, and it's been so long now, but there was just like the internet came out and did what the internet does best, which is to sort of like bottom feed and sort of cultivate the cesspool of lots of sort of like trollish sort of comments and stuff like that. Naturally, this kicked back on EU internet fans and stuff, because the thing about the Kelly Marie Tran incident as it concerns the EU is that if people were paying attention, if the journalists who covered that were paying attention, they would know that on the whole, many of us at the time didn't follow the new stuff. In fact, didn't bother actually watching the new stuff, wouldn't know who Kelly Marie Tran was in the first place, right? So I think ultimately, I think that the narrative was already written, right? And but yeah, it's true. A lot of people came out of the woodwork and just like the gutter and trashed or whatever, and sent her away. But again, at the same time, I think a lot of the narrative was already written about who was to blame, and it wasn't us, right? Clearly, but yeah, we were an easy target. And yeah, you could argue about sort of the associations and stuff, and it's true. I mean, at the same time, it's like, look, and I got into trouble for acting this way for a while, but I mean, I don't want to be close-minded about an individual who happens to also sort of like share hashtag the Fandom Menace or whatever they call themselves these days, if what that person wants to just talk about is the EU. There are people who happen to call themselves the Fandom Menacers, right, who actually do know their stuff and have something to contribute at least to a nerdy conversation about Star Wars. But yeah, the second they open their mouth about anything from a wide spectrum, from like the DC movies to like whatever like racist jokes they want to pass along, I don't tolerate that, right? So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. There is a bit of a guilt by association, but again, keep in mind, like there's also a really sort of like sort of entrenched sort of narrative already written about us, right? And so at least and by the way, I will say this: expandinguniverse.com at the time published a piece all about how everything that was happening to her was horrible. So again, if people were really looking, they could see that while frankly many of us didn't care about the new stuff anyway, didn't know who she was, we did go out of our way to actually say the bad stuff we're hearing is bad. So so let's just get the facts straight. But it is to tie this in just a brief way. It's a bit of a stretch, but this gets me thinking about the concern some have from time to time about how, say, well, this many years past decanonization, we haven't gotten what we want because of these sorts of associations, right? I think we should avoid that too, because look, there's something inside Lucasfilm that is really preventing them from wanting to take our money, and I don't know what it is, right? But it's clearly the case that some of the people there, not all, we know of some inside who do support what we do, but there are clearly some who they just don't want to give us what we want. I guess that's their prerogative, right? But I think so. They already have. It's not that they have their mind made up about us. They don't hold these views because they want to like hurt us. They just hold these views for a variety of reasons. I guess you'd have to be them to understand, right? Either it's because they want to go all in on the new stuff, or because who knows what their reasoning is. I don't think though that it's well, they're going to hold back from giving us what we want because they don't like who our friends are or perceived associations are. And because the implication there would be that, well, then they decanonized in 2014 because they didn't like who we were. And I don't think that's right. I think ultimately the decanonization was I think it was just a quixotic corporate decision that was given the sort of like the backdoor veneer of sort of a, narrative around creating creative freedom or whatever. Ultimately, it was about sort of making the JJ production deal to make the sequel trilogies palatable to him and to Bad Robot Productions. And I think all the stuff about decanonization, story group, creative freedom, blah, 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 I think was something they added on after the fact, and then did a really bad job of sort of like messaging, and then didn't help by going online and dividing the fans. So ultimately, I think it's like, I don't think how do I put this? Let's be careful. Let's not blame I know no one's saying this here, right? But let's not ever blame ourselves for not getting more legends, right? The only way I think in which we could be entitled to reflect a little bit on how maybe we've not done enough would be to sort of ask, as a fandom, as a community, are we clear in our objectives, right? Are we fighting one another too much about which tactic and strategy is the best, instead of just letting everyone try various things, right? And also when it comes down to actually putting your money where your mouth is, right? And I hate to sound like some, Thatcherite or something, some money person, but look, ultimately, if you're not buying the things that are legends oriented, right, then again, it's all a business decision. They're just going to look at the spreadsheets and do the calculations and decide on the margin. It's not worth giving us more. The trick, and that's kind of the sad thing in my case, is look, I've got everything. I've got everything pre 2014, so I don't really need to go out there and buy like the Titan sort of short story collections and stuff with the Legends banner. I don't need to get the Essential Legends collections, right? And I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to buy versions of them with covers that I don't think are actually better than the original. I think those Essential Legends, while great to see, for instance, after all these years, to go back into a Target and to see an EU book or something, that's really, really cool. But boy, what a missed opportunity to give someone like me 1 or 2 extra pages of something new, to make me want to pay the $16 or whatever. So anyway, yeah, huge tangent. Sorry about that. Let me get back to these. These stories here. Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, you can't help but feel that way, and yeah, and it's tough. I mean, I have to admit to having a little bit of that feeling that someone feels like when they've been into like an indie band for a long time, and then they blow up and get huge, and then you have, then you're that annoying jerk who's always like, well, I liked them before they got famous, right? But in some ways you can't help but feel a little bit like that about the EU. It's kind of like, it's particularly post 2014, when this was sort of an embattled, sort of underrepresented, sort of little tribe of us trying to sort of like fight the sort of the media narrative about why it was decanonized, blah blah blah. No, all of a sudden, after 2017, 2018, with the rise of some of these other communities who would kind of use some of our language, occasionally use some of our, you're kind of like, well, wait a minute, we had kind of a good thing going, right? You know what I mean? So I guess ultimately, look, that them's are the breaks. And I guess we just need to fight harder, right, to push through that narrative. But yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I do have a good relationship with Ryan, personally, and there's definitely things I've seen from him though that make me sick. Look, I'll be honest, I don't, look, whatever. He's like a shock jock, right? You know what I mean? And it's like Howard Stern or something. There's lots of things that he does that people like. There's some things he does that people tune out. Interestingly, Howard Stern does things that people don't like that make them want to tune in. And I think that's a good way of describing, I think, a lot of the appeal of, and this is not just the Fandom Menace. This is really anything online, anything on YouTube, right? It's the internet. The internet has some real benefits and some real costs, right? And this is one of the worst things, but look, I've been on many videos with Ryan where we just talk about EU stuff, and he knows his stuff, and that's great. And I will say in the very beginning, he was doing some just kind of like very, traditional sort of like, hey, here's who Mara Jade is, here's who Kyle Katarn is, sorts of videos, right? And look, I hope people got something out of them. And but anyway, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's great. I mean, I really haven't explored the new canon, but yeah, this is something I hear a lot. I mean, I think folks have given it a try, and many are sort of like, well, maybe I'll continue, but I want to sort of see what this other stuff is. Or people were EU fans, maybe gave up on it a while, thinking, well, there's this new canon stuff, I should follow that, but maybe missing the old. So it's really great. And I think the thing that's really cool is people can kind of do both, right? You know, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that. But there is something special about the EU in a sense that I've said this analogy before, and it's a really silly one, but there's this old Looney Tunes, what would you call it, like episode or something, where I'm trying to remember, it was Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, okay? And they're both performing like on stage or something, and everything Bugs Bunny is doing is just killing, right? It's just amazing. And then Daffy Duck tries to do the same thing, and like no one laughs, no one responds. Finally, it's kind of a dark episode. Finally, Daffy Duck decides, okay, here's what I'm going to do. He puts together some concoction, some crazy thing. In the end, he blows up, he kills himself. I know it's just like a really, really weird thing, but believe it or not, this is a Looney Tunes cartoon. And as his little ghost is flying to heaven, the audience is just applauding because they go, wow, what an amazing feat. And he says to the audience, to us, he says, the only problem with this trick is that you can only do it once, right? You know, you can only blow yourself up once, right, to get all this applause. And I think the EU, for all of the talk from the story group post 2014 about what the new canon was supposed to do, and how in some sense it was supposed to do the EU better than the EU, right? The narrative about it's all going to be on the same level of canon, blah, blah, blah. It's all going to be connected, which is, you know, increasingly it's been revealed to not be really very truthful, right? The thing about the EU was like, even if the new canon stuff had done it as well as the EU is a trick you can kind of only pull once, right? You know, to have gone 37 plus years just to say, well, if you like that, you're going to like this too. It's kind of like, well, the EU is really special in that way, right? Among really any franchise that really ever existed in modern pop culture. And for the sort of the new management to sort of say, well, no, if you like that, we're going to do that trick again. It's kind of like Daffy Duck sort of recognizing that, like, you can only kind of do those really special things once, you know. But again, I know there's fans who like the new stuff too, and that's great. Good for you. I'm glad. In fact, the more the new stuff in some sense survives, the more likely it is that Lucasfilm, I don't know what, fills the breathing room to give us more of the old stuff, right? So, hey man, good. Thanks for jumping on. See you next time. Oh, okay. This is a great question. I'm really glad you asked this. I think about this a lot. The definitive ending. It's a really good question. Obviously, if I had a magic wand, I'd want continuation, right? You know, no question. If I had my magic wand, I wouldn't have decanonized, right? And if I had my magic wand, there'd be things about the EU I'd do differently too, right? You know, okay, but if I'm being very realistic, right? If I'm thinking, if I'm actually like, if I'm in like a boardroom with, you know, Kathleen Kennedy or something, right? And I'm saying, look, this is what I think you can realistically sort of sell to Disney and the shareholders, right? Here's what I think makes sense. I think I want a definitive ending, some sort of closure. But I thought about this a little bit. This could come in a lot of different forms, right? I think I already mentioned, I mean, at this point, this many years down the road, closure could actually look like the following. It could actually be and this is admittedly something personal that's I've started to feel, I mean, to the extent that the 2014 decanonization announcement almost felt personal because it was so ham-fisted. I think if Lucasfilm re-messaged why they did what they did, there would be a sense of an ending, right? You know, if it was to say, for a variety of reasons, we need to move on, but what's been produced up till then was so perfect. We want to lock it in amber, right? And make sure it's never harmed, or, you know what I mean? There was any number of ways they could have given us a sense of an ending rather than unceremoniously sort of like an abruptly announced decanonization in the middle of like Dark Horse comic runs, you know what I mean? And a variety of other things that were still sort of in the process. Still playing just fast and loose with the truth about like certain projects that were never even formally canceled, like Supernatural Encounters and things like that. So, but in terms of like, here's the only problem, I think, if we're thinking realistically about searching for a definitive ending, if that's going to come in sort of like a limited form or something, maybe it's a book or a trilogy or it's a comic run or any number of things, right? The problem is that there are so many open loops in the EU, that like what does it mean? Like what should the definitive ending look like? Now that's something we would leave to hopefully like the talented creative choices that they invite in to sort of do something like this. Right now, Star Trek did this recently, and I did a whole stream, I think around October, November, with Matt Wilkins and Spencer Crilly about this on a More Civilized Age podcast, about how Star Trek, its literary continuity ended a few years ago, but some of the authors got together and proposed um, an official sort of definitive ending, which was approved and which was published late last year. And wow, that felt good. Now, I still don't think they should have ended everything, right? But they did it in a way that was like very conscious, right? Very fan sort of centric. But again, like what does a definitive ending look like for the EU? There's any number of things that we could all throw out there, and I think the danger is, let's say if they came to the fandom and said, okay, what's the ending look like to you? Well, all of a sudden, I think whatever unity that as a Star Wars fandom we have sort of like preciously had for the last several years, right? Boy, that would fly out the window immediately, because off the top of my head, I can think of a dozen things right now that I'd want to see wrapped up that may not be someone else's wish list, right? Like I'd want to see Force Unleashed 3. I'd want to see, I think the biggie would be, I'd want to see a gap between Crucible and the Legacy comics. I'd want Science Adventures 3. I'd want to know, notwithstanding Noah's recent write-up of a trilogy of what happens after Jedi Prince, I'd want to know where Jedi Prince, 7, 8, 9. I mean, there's so many little gaps here and there. I'd want much more from the Old Republic era, right? So what does it look like? I don't know. So, but anything that would give so the short answer is yes. Anything that gives us, I think, a definitive sense of an ending would be great. Yeah. Well, I think if I don't think you could be, if all we got was a sense, here's the tricky thing, right? If all we got was like a sense of what happened to the big three, like we knew what happened to Han, Leia, and Luke, that could be cool. But then again, there's so many other nerdier areas of the EU to explore and to close, but that would be interesting. But then again, maybe the fact that there's some mystery is kind of cool, right? I'm not sure. Do I generally associate with people who follow new canon and the EU? I generally don't associate with many people in general. So I do have a number of EU friends. Like, do I have many fans that are like exclusively into the new canon? Not really, but I'm just kind of a lonely hermit out here. So I don't really know. I'm open to association with all, to be honest. And I really want to stress, like, you can be a new canon fan and an EU fan, right? And so it's great. So as it concerns the Star Wars fandom, my only interest is in having Star Wars conversations, right, about the expanded universe. So that's it. I will say too, actually, one reason why I've always really valued my my friendship with Matthew Wilson, the Geeks Addict, and why I really like his channel, if you're not familiar with it, is that he's an EU fan. There's a lot of nice things to say about the EU, a lot of interesting things to say about the EU, does EU reviews, but also keeps up like book for book with the new canon. And so it's interesting just to get someone's outside perspective. And the way that I've never played, like, what's an example? Like I take World of Warcraft, right? Like I'm not really into the game, but I still, for whatever reason, from time to time, I think just because I like lore or something, I will kind of check in on like, where's that story going, right? I've read some of the books and things like that. So every once in a while, it's interesting just to hear from someone else. Like, so I tend to not take opinions about what's happening in the new canon, right? But it is interesting to sort of be informed about what's happening over there. And so I really appreciate the insights of people who sort of follow both, so. Where has she said that? Has that been on Twitter? It's interesting. I mean, yeah. I think it must have been. I mean, I think this is interesting too, because I think for a long time, particularly post 2014, but you hear it now more recently, and there's just so much confusion about Where was it? What level was the decision made? Was it, people talk about it's Disney. Disney ended the EU. Disney didn't end the EU, right? I think Lucasfilm did, and I think clearly Kathleen Kennedy. I think the buck had to stop with her. Now, it was clearly the case that there were forces inside Lucasfilm. Pablo Hidalgo was one of them, and that's not like a conspiracy or just like an accusation. He's been open about this for decades. About he'd wanted to end the EU. Wrote about it in 2006 on the StarWars.com blog. But I think that there were clearly some forces inside that sort of said, look, like here's a fresh new take. And I think being a relatively new CEO of this massive film company, massive production company, probably was like looking for some fresh ideas, and probably said, yeah, I'll defer to the people who have been here for decades, right? About like where this ought to go. I mean, after all, like I need to deliver multi-billions of dollars of revenue based on this new film production and everything we've done, right? So like I need give me big ideas. And I think ending the EU probably sounded like a big idea based on everything that I think some of the folks inside Lucasfilm were able to sell to her. I do think a major and majorly underreported piece of the puzzle, though. I mean, obviously Kathleen Kennedy probably was the one that had to make these decisions, right? But just as the boss. But I think the thing that's, and I say this entirely from sort of knowledge of what happened on the Star Trek side, going way back to like the mid 2000s when J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot got the license to produce this new series of Star Trek films. I think that let me back up a little bit. Here's what happened to Star Trek. He brought a deal to Paramount Warner's, whatever, right? Who at the time had sort of co-ownership of Star Trek. They owned different pieces of it, the films, the TV shows, the licensing, things like that. And part of the deal was, look, like I will take this on. I will, our company will, we'll take on this project. We'll reboot this whole thing, right? We'll get these movies going. But what he wanted was books and comics and toys and stuff like that, but he didn't want any competition. And this is strangely underreported, but it's absolutely true. One of the things one of the things he wanted from that production deal from Warner's and Paramount was to end all of the existing licenses. So he didn't want the pocket books. He didn't want the Dark Horse comics, whatever it was that were Star Trek related. They wanted them gone because of the weird fractured way in which Star Trek as an IP was sort of co-owned in lots of various sorts of pieces. It wasn't really possible to pull off. And for other reasons, some of those licenses were able to continue all the way up to like 2019, with like the books and things like that. So think about it. A couple of years later, when probably Lucasfilm is shopping around for a hot young director, right, to sort of take on these new films that they've announced sort of after the acquisition of Lucasfilm by Disney, JJ basically brought the same boilerplate contract and said, I will do this. I will do these 3 films, whatever the deal was at the time, but I don't want any competition. There will be spinoff books and media tie-ins and, action figures and TV shows and all this kind of stuff. I don't want this crap around, right? And I think what I think ultimately happened was, I think it was the JJ production deal, and I think some forces inside Lucasfilm who, for a variety of reasons, both creative and maybe, I don't know, whatever, bad intention, I think sort of met in the middle, and I think provided Kathleen Kennedy with an opportunity to say, yeah, let's do this new direction, let's get rid of the old. I think that's ultimately what happened. That's just my opinion. I would love someday for a business book to be written about this, right? I think it's an amazing story. Hey, what's up, Vaughn? By the way, Vaughn, are you the Vaughn that I have been talking to on Discord for a couple of years about RPG stuff? I realize we've never actually beyond that like interacted on various levels. So if it is, thanks for all the messages over the years about all the great RPG Max stuff that you're finding. Yeah. It's always interesting to hear. In my own case, I just I very, very briefly explored the new canon, but for a variety of weird reasons. One, I remember in like 2014, 2015, whenever the first couple of Star Wars like new canon books were coming out, Star Wars books. Look, I was a comic reader. I was at the shop. I saw a couple of cool covers, picked them up, right? And there was a weird curiosity too to sort of see, okay, if they are going to reboot this whole thing, like I want to see the mission statement, right? And I remember the weirdest thing about reading, I think I read, there was a Lando miniseries back then, there was a Chewbacca miniseries, and then there was something like Shattered something. It was like a prelude to Force Awakens. So there was maybe in total about 8, 10 comics I read. It's individual issues. I remember after everyone thinking, wow, like particularly with like the Lando and Chewie ones, thinking, wow, like those were incredibly average and incredibly sort of inconsequential. And I remember thinking, wow, this is real insult to injury. These are clearly stories that, at least just in terms of like major consequences or something, right? Or just like major tonal sorts of shifts, could have in theory and principle, you know, been stuck inside the EU. There was no reason, in other words, to have decanonized just so you could finally have the creative freedom to make these boring Lando stories, right? You know, where over the course of 4 issues, basically nothing happens. And again, like I kind of kept waiting for like, what's the big new restatement? And you kind of realize at that point, almost immediately, it was like, oh, okay, well, we've sort of been all lied to. That like the messaging was really that ham-fisted that there's going to be no mission statement. They're not laying out like their vision, right? No, it's just we've just transferred, you know, an IP to another production company, and we're just going to start telling different stories in different path. Just lame, you know. So anyway, but I did read. And interesting, I actually own a couple of new canon books, but only that weird set of about 3 or 4 books that were all like sort of in pre-production prior to the decanonization. So I always forget off the top of my head. It's like Tarkin, which I have read, got it as a Christmas gift. It's Tarkin, and it's been so long since, what is it, Heir to the Jedi? You guys out there know, right? You know, the ones that would, in theory, like were originally designed to be in the EU. That doesn't mean, in my opinion, that they are EU. It's just that there's like this weird sort of like asterisk around them, sort of like they fit outside the universe. They just, you know, from a real world perspective, there's something that was sort of brought in. So anyway, kind of fascinating. I will say, by the way, you know, in terms of Twitter and stuff, it is amazing. You still can actually get every once in a while some of these Lucasfilm insiders to interact with you. You know, Jennifer Heddle, Pablo occasionally. I used to interact with them quite a bit. Matt Martin, who everyone's in love with because they think he's such a nice guy, and I think he's just a weird guy who gaslights fans. I told my story number. I won't go into my experience with him again, but it is interesting. You still hear from a lot. I think Leland Chi is off Twitter now. Last time I checked, which is kind of weird, but as good as it is now, nothing was like it was in the old days with the forum, right? Where they were all there and they were really listening. Whereas I think now they hear us. They'll respond, you know, but back then they really wanted to know what we thought, and so that sort of changed in that way. But it's still nice that we can get a hold of them, I guess. I mean, it's interesting to hear from Jennifer Heddle from time to time. Yeah, I did. Hey, what's up, man? Good to see you. Yeah, hopefully. I mean, hopefully that's clear to them, right? And that's another reason why it's like let's keep our interest in it, right? You know, don't go away. And I think the fact that I've seen so many people just recently, younger folks, pop on YouTube, social media, sharing a real deep passion, not knowledge, doesn't have to be knowledge, but a real deep passion for the EU, I think is really exciting. So I think if we keep people excited about it, hopefully it'll be clear to them that there is an existing alternative, right, that they can turn to. Thanks. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Save your money and buy more EU books. Okay. I really appreciate it though. Oh, awesome. Did your opinion change of it? I'm curious. That's a neat one too. Heart of the Jedi. What an amazing moment that was last year. It's so exciting. And it's interesting. Just about a week or so ago, I was in some Star Wars collectors group and I saw someone talking about it who I don't think knew about it, didn't know it was available. So it's so neat to see people continuing to discover it. Yeah, he hypes it up for the camera, and again, like that's and the thing about Ryan is he's honest about it, right? I mean, he's not he's not like a journalist or something, right? You know, he's not supposed to be impassioned. He's an entertainer, you know, and he's obviously clearly very good at what he does. But like I say, I mean, I've had a lot of personal dealings with Ryan on a human to human level. Great guy, knows his EU. From an entertainment perspective, not my thing. Not a subscriber. No offense. Only because I do watch the EU videos he does, but I don't care what. And this is just me, that I'm just a weird guy. I don't care what anyone else thinks about, like, say, Marvel movies or something. You know, I can make up my own opinion about it. Oh my God, Dylan. You know what's so funny? I know we even talked about that, but I almost forgot. I think I'd blocked that out. That's weird. So weird. There's a lot to read into there. Either that means that they're just someone at Del Rey is just tweaking us, or they do plan to publish everything, right? So who knows? Maybe someday we will see Ruins of Dantooine as Essential Legends collection. Looney Tunes logic, exactly. I've always got the leave it to me to provide the cartoon analogies, right? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't pay enough attention. You know, it is. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't really follow much of his stuff beyond what we talk about from time to time on Matt's channel. So sorry to hear that. Yeah, no, that's the thing. I mean, I mean, it's so funny on Matt's channel with a More Civilized Age podcast. I'm sorry this turns into a whole Ryan thing. I doubt Ryan will see this, but if he does, I hope he understands where I'm coming from. I'm just trying to be as honest as he is about his channel. When he's on Matt's channel, yeah, it's great. In fact, he even holds himself back from swearing. I mean, it's really it's very interesting. Again, I don't begrudge anyone monetizing their entertainment value to hordes of YouTube subscribers. I mean, more power to them. Honestly, I mean, and so if it's, yeah, I mean, it is sort of is what it is. Yeah. It's really funny. And the interesting thing about, I mean, Ryan clearly has found a lot of success. And the interesting thing about him is that, I mean, it's funny. I talked about a lot of third, fourth generation sort of copycats. Ryan isn't one. I mean, just being totally detached about this. If your interest is in Fandom Menace content, clearly he's one of the better people to watch, right? Because you're going to get all of those sort of Fandom Menace thrills sent up your spine, right? All of his content, right? But there's lots of other people that started way after him who are just utterly embarrassing, I think. So yeah, but yeah, Ryan is not a big offender from whatever your point of view is. He's actually, again, not my thing, but he's good at what he does. This has turned into a Ryan stream, and I didn't mean for it. Yeah, EVS is weird. I mean, Ethan Van Sciver, I saw some discussion recently and people didn't know who he was. And it's so weird. He's had such a weird trajectory. I mean, he's one of these, I don't know if he calls himself fan. He's comic skate. That's what's so weird about this. And this is one reason why I actually am reluctant to talk about the EU community, EU fandom, EU movement, because movements are not fun things to be in for a lot of these sorts of reasons. Like they're sectarian. They pit people against one another. Depending on which one you're in, you start saying things that you may not even agree with. You start saying stupid things. You start acting cruelly towards others. You start viewing yourselves as part of a tribe, right? And you need to do everything you can to crush that tribe and everything you can to sort of homogenize the tribe you're in. So you start fighting with one another about, what your favorite color of M&M is or something like that. It's really, really crazy. I don't like that, right? Yes, I've played a role, and I would like to think in some degree to continue to play a role in trying to sort of, I don't know, create interest in there being a movement inside the EU fandom, which is a subgroup of the larger Star Wars fandom, right? To convince Lucasfilm to continue Legends along a parallel path. That's my mission statement. But that's it. When it comes to, and the danger is, one good way of doing that is to put these ideas out there in social media. But social media is a disgusting, cesspool. And I've said that a million times. I very reluctantly participate in it. To the extent you feel in this culture, you're going to have to sort of put some ideas out there. It's clearly a great delivery system, but social media does bad things to us, and it turns these little tribes, right, into almost like little. It's funny, all the different little groups and stuff. They're all like little. They're like little I don't know. I've said this. I've analogized it to like rap battles before, right? Where it's just you got to kind of I don't know. It's just crazy to me. Ultimately, I look at just taking YouTube. I look at YouTube and I go it's a billion hours of content new a day. I know the tiny little slice of it I'm interested in, right? It's people who talk about the EU, and I'm aware of some of the other stuff that happens over there. I may be occasionally associated with it. All I can do is continue to sort of say that you don't have to worry about what I like, what I don't like, right? I'm telling you right here. You know what I mean? What I'm up to, you know. So, but with EVS, it's so weird. Like, yeah, with like the Comicsgate thing or whatever, you get into the whole sociology of that movement and how it relates to the Phantom Menace and blah blah blah. But it's so weird because like he is so persona non grata now in like the mainstream comic industry, and maybe I think to his delight. But it's people like forget he seems just sort of like this online troll now. Like he was one of like the major comic artists, you know, and contributors for years. I mean, as late as like DC Rebirth and stuff, you know. I mean, his contributions to Green Lantern, his collaborations with Jeff Johns, it's you know, it's a shame he's decided to kind of go in a different path. Again, he's just being him, right? He's just monetizing his ideas about the industry for his own gain and providing entertainment to his fans, and more power to them. But I wish he were still contributing to DC Comics, you know, because I think he's a great artist and made some lasting contributions. I couldn't give a shit about his, you know, current views about whatever he talks about, right? I just want to see him draw Flash again, you know, honestly. So totally right, Dylan. A definitive ending would have to be at least a dozen different stories. I agree. And so, hey, you know, if we have a magic wand and we want a definitive ending, let's get those dozen, right? That would be great, you know, but you're totally right. It's going to be a lot of different things. Yeah. Well, I totally agree. I think we just end the stream right there. Let's see here. I'm really behind on all of these. That's very nice of you to say that I'm on the side of neutrality logic. I'll have to leave it to everyone watching this to see if that's true. Certainly, you sort of strive towards that. And again, I listen for the sake of entertainment. I totally understand why people want to you know, whoop it up online. Not my style. And you know, look, I'm not as interesting as them either. I'm not as entertaining as them either, right? All I can do is talk about the EU, and you know, and gosh, like even and we all find our niches, right? That's the thing. Like, forget the Phantom Menace for a second. Somehow this turned into a stream about them. Here's my niche, right? Like, it's clearly is if folks who've been watching my videos for a while have seen it's like the collecting side, you know. If you want reviews, and you go to Matt Wilkins, right? If you want, you know, deep historical knowledge about the EU, go to Matt Wilkins, right? But like if you want really interesting, or Alex or Lance, or I mean a bunch of people, Evan, if you want like really interesting sort of debates on the margins, on sort of like the nerdy fringe, right, about sort of where the EU, you know, could have gone, should have gone, you know, go to like Quality Autism. I mean, there's like a lot of great channels out there with really cool niches, right? Mine right now is like collecting. That's all, you know. So I can't be as entertaining as Ryan or some of these things. Trust me, you won't care about my opinion about Captain Marvel. You know what I mean? You might not even care about my opinion about the EU, but all I can do is sort of like, you know, every couple of days hold up a new, you know, collectible from the EU that I've got, right? You know, and by the way, as far as that goes, I got some cool things coming down the pike. I got some really cool things. One thing that I realized, like I never followed up on, and that might have been like a year ago, is I did a video highlighting a bunch of insider sort of Lucasfilm publishing catalogs that I have that I got from Ryder Wyndham. So these are things that published by Lucasfilm licensing, almost like yearbooks, and I got them for 4 different years. I think from around 97 through 2000, or 98 to 2001, something like that. And they literally, page after page, if you guys haven't seen the video, highlight every known licensed work by Lucasfilm. And this includes things outside Star Wars, like Indiana Jones, including things that like most people in North America don't know about, like the like German only original Indiana Jones adventures, things like that. So I think I want to go through that. But actually, as it concerns sort of like insider stuff, I realized that in one of my long boxes of magazines, like of old Star Wars magazines, I actually had some things from some mid-90s licensee sort of only events at Skywalker Ranch. So I've got, every couple of years, they would do these Star Wars summits where they would bring in about maybe 500 of the major licensees, you know, from Hasbro and Del Rey and Bantam or whatever at the time. And so I've got like all the materials from that for a couple of years, you know. And in some cases, they're not super interesting. They almost look like fan club folders, right? Inside, you know, like there's basic paperwork about sort of the value of the brand and whatnot. But in a couple of other cases, I got some really neat things too, including like specific licensee sort of like plans for the years. It's really neat insider stuff. So some cool stuff coming down the road. Also, a couple of things that I'm working on. These are things I've had, but there's something I've got a line on right now that I'm very nervous to talk about because it might go away. But if I can secure it, if I can actually buy it, I don't know how to put this. Like, don't worry, there's plenty of stuff I can talk about for at least a couple of years in terms of the collectibles, in terms of these like rare third-party RPG mags that have Star Wars original EU content, and then there's a lot of stuff to do. But there's something I have out there that I have a line on that if I find it, if I can buy it, and I'll know in a couple of days if I did, I think, I don't know how to put this, it's weird, like I think I wouldn't need to get any EU promo ever again because I'd have everything that I need, which is really hard to believe. Now, that's partially because after all these years of sort of, and the thing I've spent the last year doing is finally getting it all out, cataloging it, indexing it in a way that's accessible and stuff, preserving it, archives. But I think through all of this, I've realized the thing that I think I'm most passionate about in collecting are posters. And so there's almost an infinite number of EU promos out there, you know, everything from t-shirts and buttons and keychains and sell sheets and insider stuff and licensees. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think posters is the thing that matters to me the most. I mean, I've got several hundred just EU related posters, but there's a poster that I've found that I've known existed for years. I've never owned it. I've owned different versions of it, but never like the original one. I'm being vague, but and the funny thing is if you guys see it, you'll be like, oh, that's cool, fine. But to me, it's the white whale. And I've never actually seen one for sale before, ever, in 40 years. So it may be mine soon. So I'm excited about that. And if that happens, it's really weird to say. Again, I won't be done talking about Star Wars. This isn't some sort of like, oh, I'm going to leave the fandom. But I think I'll be done collecting. I can finally save my money after all these years. So anyway, I got to get back. I'm so behind on some of these. Hey, what's up, Blue Pig? Hey. Hey, what's up, Ethan? I am looking through it, yeah. There's so many. There's so many. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm so sorry to hear that. Good to see you. I'm so behind. I'm trying to scroll through all these. Is it possible that Disney Canon Comics will reprint omnibus collections? Yeah, that would be weird. It is Yvonne. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining here, and thanks for all the messages. For folks who don't know, Vaughn, if you guys think I'm into those RPG mags with Star Wars content, right? You ain't seen nothing yet. Tip of the iceberg compared to what Vaughn here has been digging up. But you'll see mine sooner than later. But Vaughn's digging up some really cool stuff. Oh, did you find the ones you were looking for, Evan? Like are you talking about like the Empire and the Return versions? Let's see here. Hey, what's up? Now I've wanted to ask you, do you pronounce it revanchist, which is what I would, right? Or is it because it's kind of the pun of revanchist or revankist? Let me know. I'm always curious. But I don't know why I keep doing it. But even though I'm a hardcore EU fan, I still read the canon stuff. The canon stuff is incredibly inconsequential. Yeah, well, presumably you're getting some utility from it. I think it's great. I'm glad. Look, for folks who want to, there's an obvious appeal to me about the fact that there is still something technically called Star Wars that's out there in print, right? And it's one reason why, again, that's obviously the good side of the Essential Legends collection being out there. It feels fresh, right? It's out there. It feels something that's current. I think to the extent that lots of people right now in our pop culture want to be part of the conversation, it's neat that there's like Legends things, right now they're fresh, they're hot off the presses, right? But in terms of the new stuff, I can appreciate someone sort of like being drawn to it. It's the new thing called Star Wars that's out, right? But this is the feedback I get about it being incredibly inconsequential. It's a real shame, and it's too bad. It's just too bad. I genuinely feel bad for, I'm not saying this is you, but for the people who really bought hook, line, and sinker post 2014, the messaging from Lucasfilm that it was all going to be somehow different or better or improved or whatever, right? And then I think many of whom walked away. I think Nathan Butler was an interesting example of that. Someone who was a contributor to the EU himself, who let go with both hands after 2014 to focus on the new stuff in a new way, and who basically a couple of years ago retired altogether, and now does kind of like me, just walked away from the lore. And now in his case, I talk about EU promos and collectibles and stuff, and he talks about random versions of the old VHS movie releases and stuff like that. But it's sad. I think he got burned. I think he got burned by the new stuff big time. Well, it's true. They do know it. Listen, Lucasfilm knows it. The licensees know it. And the licensees, and we've said this a number of times, we know firsthand from licensees, various people in these companies, whether it's Del Rey or Marvel or Hasbro. I've talked with Hasbro about this. Hasbro talks about, like, when they put out like a Jaina figure, like they sell it as part of the Legends line or whatever. They don't have one, but that's the way they think of it, right? And they sell it to fans that way, who get that too. I've seen them on the floor at conventions do that, and everyone gets it. Everyone who actually makes the stuff gets it, but Lucasfilm, who's got the green light, they don't care. It's weird. It's really, really weird. Probably not. Totally agree. And yeah. There's very little as ambitious as NJO really in any franchise, right? Let alone sort of like the Star Wars 2.0. Yeah, no, it's there was a real sense of something building, right? And every once in a while, I hear questions about, can you start the NJO from scratch? I guess you could, right? But I mean, if you're building to it, wow, what a payoff, right? And that's what I mean. It's so weird with like post 2014 Star Wars. It didn't actually start from scratch. There's all this weird baggage. And again, to like kick things off with a couple of novels that were supposed to be published pre-2014 that got sort of reworked, one of which is 1/3 of a uncompleted trilogy in the EU. I mean, just all this weird stuff. And then like the Lando and Chewie comics, like this was not a way to kick things off in a way that leads to NJO. And then I'm just hearing horrible things about this, like new book, for instance, Scoundrel, or what's it called? Something like it's basically the book that's a tie-in to the Disney Star Wars resort. And by the way, I'm not going to go on a Disney rant, but like they've basically, I just heard it's just horrible. Like there's no world building or world building that you would actually use as a foundation to do more world building, right? It's just so sad. Now this is the book. If I could get one continuation of the EU, it would have to be Crystal Star 2. I'm excited to see, by the way, that there is a slight new revisionism occurring around Crystal Star. There are one or two people out there saying positive things about it, if mixed, right? And very interesting. Boy, times have changed, right? Well, I do hear this, and I can only speak, secondhand, thirdhand, or whatever. But the High Republic, I assume you're referring to. I mean, this is the sort of new publishing initiative inside the new canon that, at least from what I hear, is like a bit more of kind of an actual I don't know. I don't know if it's a story arc or if there's just more interconnectedness or something. There's something about it that feels a bit more EU, but only by design, not necessarily. This is the one thing I am entitled to say, because I don't follow the new stuff, and I don't make it a point to go after the new stuff, but I do have eyes, and if you go on any social media platform, you can't help today but see stuff from the new Star Wars, right? Just through osmosis. The stuff I've literally just seen, like the cover art and some of from the High Republic, it actually really bugs me. By the way, so does the Essential Legends cover art too. I could talk about that. It bugs me for different reasons, but there's something about the High Republic stuff. It doesn't feel like Star Wars. Now then again, as far as I'm concerned, the new stuff isn't my Star Wars, so who cares? It can be whatever it needs to be. But it's weird. It feels like something you'd see on some sort of unrelated kind of high fantasy franchise. It just doesn't feel Star Warsy to me. Again, it doesn't have to. I'm not going to buy it anyway, but I feel that way about the Essential Legends stuff too. The covers, I think, in maybe only a very rare case or two, have even marginally improved on what no one asked them to improve in the first place. I don't think the covers are better, and I think the weirder thing is that I think the covers look very dark. I mean, they make Star Wars seem like a horror franchise, and I just don't get that. What is it with all of these new covers? Back in, what was it, 2015, 2016, when they did the Thrawn trilogy again, when they reissued that with the new covers, I don't think they were an improvement. Who was asking for new covers? I mean, Heir to the Empire, whatever you think about that book, whatever you even think about the cover, it is iconic. It's almost like beyond critique. It's like, wow, like that. I mean, bold move, guys. I don't know who's clamoring for that. And another classic case of they kind of hear us, but they're not listening, right? It's like, we don't want new covers. We want a new story. Give us more Legends, right? Not more Legends artwork. That no one asked for, but we're not in control, so whatever. I'm super behind in chat. I'm looking at my thing. I'm the scroller. I think I'm only halfway through, and I think I've got to go in a few minutes. So I'm going to get through this really fast. I'm seeing a ton of Waru and Crystal Star references. Great. Always works for me. I'm one of the few people who's not afraid to say that, like, there are things about Crystal Star that I appreciate's not the right word, that I will stick up for. There's context and nuance I like to add. I went on Lance's channel, what was that, like a month ago, Lance, if you're still here, talked a bit about that. And whatever. It is what it is. Hey, what's up, Ray? I haven't seen you in a long time. No, Matt did not join Fandom Menace. No, he didn't. Hey, what's up, man? Good to see you. Yeah, this is something Matt is reading this right now, so I hope Matt talks more about this. There seems to be a real resurgent, or I've noticed a real growing interest in his stuff. But I got to get through these. Let's see here. Let's talk more EU. Is Dark Rendezvous more of a Yoda or Dark? Yeah, what do you think? It's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both, actually. I think it shouldn't have been called Yoda, subtitled Dark Rendezvous. I think Dark Rendezvous would have been enough, because it is a Dark Rendezvous. In that sense, it is about Yoda and Dooku meeting, right? But it's about everything else. I mean, I love that book so much. I love the insights into Yoda. I love the insights into Dooku. I love them meeting. I love the world building around Padawan life in the beginning. I love that book. I would not have called it Yoda, Dark Rendezvous. I would have just called it Dark Rendezvous, which relates to another interesting question about certain EU books that I think deserve different or better titles. I think Kenobi is a title that radically underserves that book. Me too. And I think mostly because the culture war is bullshit. I think a lot of it's made up and whooped up. And I think that some of the people who both participate in it and who profit from it are fine that it's made up, right? But they end up perpetuating it too in ways that then over time drag them down into it, to the point that I don't know if they can actually make a distinction between what's real and what's fake. So yeah, I think if you liberate yourself from this, and it largely lives online and social media, which I think has facilitated it and made it appear more severe, and in some cases actually more severe. I think that if you could liberate yourself from this, I think in general, I think people would feel much happier. The only good news is that I think because it is to some degree, it's not totally like a product of, but it's being facilitated by social media and things. Social media has a way of burning through content and burning people out about certain content. I think faster than things would normally otherwise sort of like sift through the ether in society. And I think in some ways it speeds. It doesn't speed up like positive social change, but it can burn through stupid things real fast. There's whiffs, for instance, that whatever you think about what people call cancel culture, there's already a sense that like it's starting to lose its power, right? For instance, right? I think it's because everyone got canceled for a couple of years and now everyone's got nothing left to cancel people. But social media did that, right? So I think the culture war is gonna, and the perception of one is gonna burn out, hopefully sooner than later, But as long as people want to cling to social media, it'll always be with us for a little while. But I'm sick of it too. Whatever you think about it, I totally agree. And this is the one thing I will say. If people have been watching this entire time, maybe I've appeared a little sort of speaking out two sides of my mouth about, say, the fandom menace or culture war stuff or whatever. Right? To be absolutely clear, I think most of that stuff is boring and potentially harmful. Right? I don't like it. I don't consume it. Right? I'm happy to judge it. But at the same time, I'm like, so I don't want to appear like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. No, it's dumb. And the one thing I'm happy to really jump on board is like, when there are now these like third, fourth wave sort of copycats coming around, literally telling you that they're fighting a culture war, right? That like what happened to their expanded universe was so important to them personally that they now literally are using like the language of war. You're dealing with either a stupid clown reactionary or someone who's actually like lost their marbles, right? And in both cases, it would make me embarrassed to think that anyone associates me by just being an EU fan with someone who's such a clown reactionary like that, right? Who would talk about the language of culture war. That's stupid. It is. I mean, on the one hand, I hate when people just go, "Oh, it's just a fictional universe," right? Well, no, it means a little bit more to us, right? This is important to us. The EU really, really matters, right? But culture war, what the fuck does it even mean? I mean, it's just crazy, Yeah, so I'm done with it too. It's really interesting to see how many subscribers I either gain or lose based on this, because I'm sure there's a lot of fandom menace overlap, right? But again, I hope it's clear. I hope it's clear that like my views about things beyond EU don't have to necessarily matter, right? If you care about my thoughts on the EU, you probably watch if you're an EU fan. If not, you don't watch, in the same way that like, hey man, I will talk to anybody if they want to talk about the EU. But when they start talking about their views on like, whatever, whether She-Hulk sucks or something, that's another matter. Now, by the way, not to be a hypocrite, because there are some folks who I've talked to on this chat about She-Hulk recently, and I have views about it. But those are people I consider sort of like, hopefully friends, right? So it's like we can have those conversations when it talks about sort of like monetizing random sort of silly views about pop culture. I just don't care. I'll listen to your thoughts on the EU, but other than that, it's not what I'm interested in. But yeah, I did actually, Rave. If you go back, I think it's like October, November. There's a Matt More Civilized Age podcast where I talked all about that. Was very happy to see it, and it's yeah, I got a lot of thoughts there. Very, very happy about that. Oh, well, interesting. Fantastic. Okay. Well, I see. I was hoping you were going to be a little bit more biased about that stuff because, I mean, I bet you could be very entertainingly sort of critical of the Dead Universe stuff. I can't wait to read this, though. Thanks for sending it along. I'm still way behind. God, what time is it? How long have I been doing this now? Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. I'm getting close to the end here. Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, I think they're all still up. So Matt Wilkins, if you go on Amazon, I think if you like search for Matt Wilkins, Tales from the Galaxy, there's some stuff that Matt's put up. Maybe he doesn't want me advertising it, I don't know, but there's some fun stuff he's put up. A couple of cases, it's some Star Wars related things, like official things, but maybe he doesn't want me saying that. But there's some good fan fiction, including some Matt stuff there too, which I like. You can check that out. You can pick that up. I'm waiting for volume 2 to come, and then I'm going to show them all off. Let's see here. I am so behind. Here we go. Here's a HoloNet. Chris, I've come across your promos for magazines. Full page. Some are harder to find. Have you seen one for Star by Star? The short answer is I don't know. I'd have to think about that. Star by Star. I think. Yes, I think I do. What would it be? I think I do have a Star by Star one. No, but if you're asking about individual magazines, so here's the thing. I actually don't have many. Well, here. One thing I've got for Star by Star is I have a sell sheet. I think I've shared that off. This is really weird. It's really, I have the UK Star Wars licensee Arrow Books has a sell sheet for UK retailers. The backside of which has information about the book, the front side of which has the Star by Star cover art. If memory serves, I think there's also a bookstore display, like, with a stand and a header for Star by Star. But when it comes to individual magazines, and I presume you mean things like promo print ads and stuff, I don't actually go out of my way to collect them on the whole. And it's partially because in almost 100% of cases where something like that would have been advertised, it would have been advertised in an existing Star Wars magazine, which I already have. So I've never gone on my way to either cut them out or to sort of search for them separately. But in terms of promos, outside of a magazine ad or something, I think that Star by Star UK sell sheet is the one thing I have. The there are a number of NJO bookstore display headers. I don't have all of them. So if there is one of those, I don't have it. But thanks for the question. Thanks for watching that stuff. Oh, good. I'll have to check that out. Okay, cool. Oh, interesting. Yeah, couldn't have said it better. Don't hate canon. Don't know enough about it to hate it or like it. But it doesn't hold interest for me, and largely for a very, in my opinion, straightforward reason that I liked the EU and followed the EU for all those years because I wanted to know what happened after the movies. It was that simple, and it's, they made a break with that. They made a real world break with the continuity and said, now this is what happened after the movies, and it didn't, right? And from my point of view, the EU, so it's just not interesting to me. So yeah, but again, for folks who find it interesting, great. Interesting you say that though about DC post New 52. I think the New 52 was obviously, like a lot of comic runs, a little bit of a mixed bag. I liked a lot of it at the beginning. Like Justice League, I liked Wonder Woman. I actually liked Aquaman, was really good. I mean, there was a lot of really good things about it. Justice League, I thought was really great by the end, like the last year or so. I mean, this is probably clear from earlier stuff I said. I'm a big Jeff Johns fan, and obviously he was all over that stuff. But interestingly, I was so into the Justice League run that kind of built into the end of the New 52 and the beginning of Rebirth, that I got a little bitter because I remember thinking oh my God, yet another reboot, right? And if only I had known, or, a couple of years ago, how many more reboots there would be in DC alone. It's just insane. Give Rebirth a try though. I regret not. I picked up some of the early stuff, like the Rebirth special issue, which was really good, and then a couple of the first issues from some of the runs, and I was like, I can't do this right now. I had other things to sort of focus on anyway in my life. But then went back and realized, wow, no joke. I don't know if you're a Superman fan at all. If you're reading DC, might be of interest to you. I honestly, it's a shame. I think Batman got worse, but the Superman titles, holy cow! The Superman Rebirth titles, it only went for a couple of years. This was before Bendis took them over. are so good, particularly if you're anything like me, my sort of age, and remember kind of like the post-crisis sort of golden era, like the kind of like went through sort of like the Jurgens run and stuff with like Death of Superman, that whole era. Jurgens and Tomasi did both Action Comics and Superman. So good, so good. There's an amazing miniseries that led into that. I think it's called Superman, Lois and Clark, but it's basically about them having a kid, and basically it being the version of Superman and Lois from the post-crisis era, from like the pre-New 52 getting brought into Rebirth, right? So the New 52 Superman like kind of like dies away. It's a kind of complicated thing to explain. I don't want to spoil or whatever, but it's like give it a try. It was really good. And then Bendis came and ruined everything. Okay. Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, well, thanks for explaining that. Even better. Okay, great. Fair enough. I think there is. If you consider that for 30 years, there were 0 people who liked it, and now there's like 1.5 people who like it. It's pretty significant. That's significant step change improvement, right? Bad characterization. Agree. It's weird. Bad characterization. We've talked about the book cover is bizarre. Han is being forced to stare at Luke's crotch. Everything about it is really weird. But there's other things about it that aren't as bad as people talk. And I just think it's the classic case of a book that may deserve its reputation, but I don't think in a long while has honestly earned it. It's one of those books that I think it's the sort of thing that in the fandom you're supposed to have a bad opinion about without actually sort of having experience yourself. And my other unpopular take is that the reverse is true with Kenobi. It's the book you're supposed to say is great. You have to say it's great. I think it's good, but you have to say it's great, right? You know, I think there are some great books. I'd put Plagueis up there. I'd put the Revenge of the Sith novelization. There's a long. You have to say Kenobi's great in the fandom. You have to say Crystal Star's bad. I just want people to read both. That's my only hope. And I particularly with Crystal Star. Give it a try. It's a quick read. But the characterization is off. No question. Here you go. We got another one. Okay, now there's 2.5 people who sort of like it. Fantastic. I didn't yet. And thanks for reminding me about that. I need to do that. I have a funny thing about this. I've said this before. Post 2014, there's a lot of new stuff that has come out, or older stuff that's been rediscovered or whatever. I'm savoring it. I feel a little bit like I'm marooned on a desert island with like only like one bottle of whiskey or something that sort of like floated off the ship or something, you know, what I found. And I'm saving it for a special occasion. So it's like, you know, it took me a little while to get around to like the translated Han Solo Hungarian book. It took me, I'm trying to think of other examples of this, you know, right? But I'll tell you what, when the new Supernatural Encounters comes out, that's going to be a real feast. It's going to be a monster of a book too, just in sheer page length. But it's a book I think you're going to want to study. I'm really looking forward to diving into that. But that's going to be something I don't want to race through it. Like these are some of the last things realistically we're going to get for a long time. Anyway, that's a very melodramatic answer to your question. I haven't read that stuff yet. No. No, I'm so behind. Here we go. Well, that's a good question. It's interesting to think of. Yeah, I'd be interested, you know, from people who are reading the new stuff. Do they have any sense in reading the new canon stuff? Like, do you have any sense that these are authors that grew up with the old EU? The cynical view I hear is that Del Rey, oddly, has gone in so many different directions with its author choices that it's not, and I'm just speculating based purely on what some people tell me, that like it's not entirely clear that some of the new writers really grew up on the old EU, right? In the way that it was obviously the case that some of the early EU authors, in many cases, weren't old enough to have grown up on an EU. In some cases, weren't even old enough to grow up on Star Wars, but were obviously familiar with it and fans of it, right? And so it's interesting, but they're definitely. I know this. From what I know personally, the most I can say is the following. I know this. I don't know if any old authors have approached Lucasfilm about continuing Legends. I do know personally that there are old Legends authors and major ones who don't like the way things went down. And in fact, I heard this. I don't know personally, but I heard from a friend who told me, right, a reputable source, that a major author who you'd be surprised by, who has otherwise made a lot of sort of public statements, sort of seeming to sort of say, look, Legends fans, cool down, who has even gone and written for the new canon in a number of significant ways, who is still just beside himself at what they did. Someone who, before the reboot, had said that the reboot would be a very messy thing to do and a very undesirable thing, but who is nonetheless very pissed at the way everything went down. And what I really hope, and if I ever get the chance to talk with more authors, I want to ask them these questions. I really hope that those who do have access start asking them the right question. I'm so bored at the question that they're always asked, like, whatever, like Kevin J. Anderson, what do you think about what Lucasfilm did to the new storyline by rebooting it? Oh, well, it's theirs. They can do whatever they want. Well, of course it is. Who's challenging that, right? We're not making a legal argument, right? It's like, ask him, what would you do if you could continue it, right? That's what I want to know. And I think if you ask that, you get a much different side of their personality. Try it. You'd be shocked. They've got a lot of ideas about what they wanted to do, where they want to see it going, right? So it's really, there's no question. If Del Rey ever got the green light, there's a deep well of people who I think are ready to go. It's funny. I presume, Matt, you're talking about the Tales of the Galaxy. Now, what's really funny is I've only got the 2 so far, Volume 4 and Volume 3. Volume 2, I think, is going to be here in a couple of days, and I hope you do a Volume 1. But what's funny is they're different sizes. So Volume 3 is like really big, and I must be because I think there's a lot more in there. You've got like all of, I think, Cult Encounters in there, something from Joe, but they're different. But I think that's perfect because it's just like the EU, right? There was always those random books that didn't quite fit, like Siege and Gambit, or like, it's like, wait, why is this here? So it's perfect. To me, it's an homage to the imperfect perfection of the EU book sizes. You don't understand the new canon hate. I mean, I get it, right? I mean, people are still pissed. I get that, right? And they want to act out. So I'm not surprised, but I agree with you. Like, just enjoy what you're going to enjoy. And if you're a new canon fan, don't worry about what an EU fan thinks. I mean, that's the other thing too. The only sort of old man advice I can ever offer anyone is you don't owe anyone anything. No one else's opinion matter. And I think the sooner you liberate yourself from any opposite view, the happier you'll be in life. So if you love the new canon, just love it. Don't worry about what EU fans think. And as EU fans, don't worry about what the new canon's supposedly doing to your Star Wars. It's not, it's not doing it. I'm not one of these guys who says, oh, don't worry, the EU's there. They'll never come in and take your books away. I hate that argument. I want more of it, right? And as a matter of fact, post 2014, there's a decreasing amount of stuff that is available. Young Jedi Knights, things like this. Junior Jedi Knights, like, it's not available digitally. Oddly, it's not getting reprinted. I mean, so it turns out there is stuff that's getting harder and harder to find. And that's a problem. I want more new stuff anyway. But it's like, but I totally agree, Evan, in the sense that, like, hey man, like, I get people's outrage, but whatever. Just, yeah, exactly. Tend to your own garden, enjoy your own stuff, No, it's a really good question. Thanks for asking that, Ethan. there's a lot of stuff pre-91. So there's, I mean, just going in reverse order. So there are, for instance, like magazine print promo advertisements for like the 3D comics. There are official promo posters, promo sell sheets, promo flyers, promo brochures, promo like promo button giveaways for the West End Games supplements. Like so 86, 87, for like the core rulebook and stuff, there's a number of things like an official promo poster, which by the way, I'm seeing some person on eBay selling fake reproduction stuff. So you always got to be really careful. No, but like official promos, a lot of really cool official promo posters and like kind of premium inducements for the West End Game stuff. Going back before that, an avalanche of stuff related to the Ewoks and Droids cartoons and movies and home video releases, things like that. So tons of stuff there, shelf talkers, store displays, sell sheets, promo flyers, promo posters. What else do you see from that? And then the tie-in books, right? There's promos there, whether it's Dragon Books, Happy House. I mean, the list goes on and on. Go back further. I've shown a couple of things. I think I've made this about like some of the Han Solo books. So like when it was Del Rey way back in the day, like Del Rey put out some promotional things. One of the earliest, and I should say too, the novelizations of the original trilogies all had store displays, store promo posters, promo brochures, sell sheets, the whole thing. So basically everything you're seeing that I've shown off post 91, to a large degree they had before, right down to like the store stands, and then by the way, across the globe too. So there are some for Australia, some for the UK, some for the United States, obviously, some in Spanish-speaking countries. I mean, so ton of that stuff. One of the coolest things I've seen, and it's one of the only things that of this type that I haven't just decided, screw it, I'll take out a second mortgage and buy, right? I've seen it twice now in about the last year or so. It's a Splinter of the Mind's Eye bookstore display. So it's like the topper for a stand, right? And it's been really neat to see that something, I think I knew that existed. I don't think I'd ever seen a photo of it. The weird thing is that the promos were pretty boring back in the day, I have to be honest, right? And they've waxed and waned. I actually think a lot of the early Bantam UK book promos are bizarre, but really boring, like weird. Like it's just like one art file of like Han Solo standing there not smiling, but just like an orange background. That's it. Weird stuff like that, right? No, but so like all the way back to Splinter of the Mind's Eye, there's bookstore displays. And like I said, I passed it up twice, way too expensive considering the condition. It might seem like I'm kind of a hoarder and because I clearly have a lot of this stuff, but I'm pretty picky about what I bring into the collection. Like I'm pretty sensitive about like, preservation and stuff like that. So if something looks like it's kind of, I mean, how can you put this? Like things from the 70s smell like they're from the 70s, right? You know what I mean? Like they start to get moldy and dusty and all that kind of stuff. I don't want that crap. These Splinter of the Mind's Eye promos I've seen, they were in horrible condition. So, no, but you can go all the way back and see that. And I will say, I've been on a quest to try and discover what's the first Star Wars EU promo ever. And I think I know what I think I've found it actually. It's a t-shirt promoting from 1976, promoting the novelization. And it's really simple and it's blue and it just says Star Wars on it, but it's from Ballantine Books. So I think that's at least a shortlist contender for the first EU promo ever. Obviously, there were Star Wars promos before that, right? But that might be the first promo EU. It's a T-shirt. Yeah, it's just a blue T-shirt. So maybe someday we'll show that off. Yeah, I liked it. I really like the Jurgen stuff too, and we could have a whole separate Superman conversation. It just felt very 90s to me, like in a good way, like early 90s. I'm a big Jurgens fan, though, in general. I hate that. I hate when they say that, yeah. Ugh. Let it go, move on. That's just amazing. Listen, Lucasfilm moved on from us, right? We woke up one morning, April 25th, 2014, had our world changed, right? It's, it's like, so annoying, so annoying. Yeah, I really like DC Rebirth. It's a real shame that they rebooted that. It was really weird. They kind of just slowly kind of got rid of it, and then my biggest regret about Rebirth is that you can tell from the Rebirth special issue one-off that sort of got everything going. You could tell there was a big plan, but I think Jeff Johns got a little too busy. I think his like favorite artist of choice takes too long with great results, and it was all supposed to sort of culminate in kind of like the inclusion of the Watchmen universe formally into the mainline DC Rebirth continuity. That was going to end with Doomsday Clock, but it's pretty clear with Doomsday Clock getting sort of pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, that by the end, what Doomsday Clock ended up being is not really what it was originally intended to be, and it's a real shame. Another sort of case of like, I want to see like the treatment for what the Rebirth continuity, what the DC universe was supposed to do. What was Doomsday supposed to do? Because it clearly didn't end exactly where I think Jeff Johns wanted it to, and I think it's a real shame. And now DC Comics is in such a horrible place. I stopped reading comics about a year ago. It just wasn't worth the money anymore, and I'll get caught up later down the road. There's still a couple things I like. I'm a big Flash guy, always have been. I think it's most people get him right. It's funny. I think he's one of the few comic characters that you can still do older style comic stories with, where like, and this is really hard for people to remember, but like in the 80s and stuff, when I was like really into reading comics, it was like, like a story lasted one issue. It was that simple, you know? That was it. And Flash is one of the few characters you can kind of still do that for. You know, he encounters a problem, he runs real fast, he solves it. Maybe he encounters some sort of like, you know, villain, right? But by the end, it's sort of done. Sure, he's part of these longer arcs, but it seems like there's such a simple formula, and a lot of Flash writers seem to be doing well at understanding that. Oh, that's interesting. No, I'd have to think about that. Any speculation? I don't know. It's a good question. Off the top of my head, first thing that comes to mind is there is, and Matt Wilkins has talked about this, and he's the one who started to get me thinking about this. I think it's a really, really important insight. If you were one of a number of fans, my generation, who grew up with the movies, the originals, who then followed the EU because you wanted to know what was happening next, who then was right there with like the post 91 resuscitation, right? You're on this train. You're growing up. You're maturing. You're developing along with Star Wars, right? As a storyline, as like a continued expanded universe. By the time NJO hits, if you're part of this generation, you're grown up in the same way that as a storyline, Star Wars is kind of grown up, darker, more mature, more consequential. And now you've got a job, a career, a life. You've got money to go buy every Star Wars book that comes out, including all 19 or whatever it was, right at the time. That's just off the cuff. That's my thinking. Good for you, dude. That's good. Thank you. Yeah, would have been interesting. I, you know what? I don't know, or maybe if I did, I've forgotten. I don't know what she thought about the reaction. I don't know if she knew about it. You know, I mean, I think most people know she was a Star Trek writer and beyond. Really like her Trek stuff, but she obviously never came back to Star Wars. I really don't know what she knew of the reaction. Oh, hey Arthur. You know what? Garth Nix, right? Yeah, I have. In fact, I need to double check. Wait, Seventh Tower. It's actually is it Scholastic? Let me look, because isn't it? It's kind of a kind of like it's like a Lucasfilm kind of collab, isn't it? Let me look this up. Yeah, the Garth Nix stuff. I in my wildest headcanon, I want to find a way of making Seventh Tower inside. Because why do I think that this was originally supposed to be somehow like Lucasfilm connected, not Star Wars connected, but it's Lucasfilm. But yeah, I read that a long time ago, and it's funny you mention that because I saw it in the used bookstore recently, like in the young adult section, and I kind of want to revisit it. So I want to hear more of your thoughts about it. Oh, interesting. That I guess I'm not surprised by. I suppose someone like him, I wouldn't be surprised that he read some of that stuff. I seriously doubt, from what I know, and this is not me making a comment about the Disney canon, but from what I know about some of the writers, the Disney canon from their other work, I'm I'd be surprised that some of them were deep into the EU. Welcome back, Lance. You're back. Wow. I should probably get going pretty soon. Let me see. I'm glad. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. What is here? I'm getting caught up. I'm almost towards the end. Let's see. I don't think I am. I don't support monarchy, but I appreciate the sentiment. You never know. You never know. But I will say, I've been able to find some of the stuff at a really good price. So, and I hope, I hope no one out there is supporting their EU hobby by doing anything that puts them in any financial trouble. This should really be sort of like only above the line when everything else is sort of taken care of, right? So I really hope people are being wise about their EU decisions, right? It's another reason why, though, I think it's really unfortunate that a lot of stuff isn't more widely available online or whatever, right? You know, the lengths to which EU fans, dedicated, passionate new EU fans, have to go to track down, say, something now like something as like mainstream as like Young Jedi Knights, or as like obscure as a complete run of Star Wars missions, or the West End Game Adventure journals. It's disgusting, you know, and that stuff should be available digitally in a way that like at least would allow you to legitimately sort of pick it up at, you know, at like a better price. It's just a shame, you know. It's sad to think that someone has to basically go broke to sort of try and reread the EU. I hate that. Oh yes, this was great. Yeah, that's right, because there's like a I think there's one extra one that came. I forget, is it the UK or Australia? There's one for these decide your destiny things. I think there's a one, and there's like a box set you can buy from Australia that I think has all 5 or something like that. I forget. I need to dig those up. Yeah, it could have. Where is the comic? Could have been that. It could have been direct to retailers. I don't know. I need to look more into it. Do you know? I don't think I've ever seen it. I don't know. I'm not sure. Oh, absolutely. And that's a sense in which it wasn't a surprise what happened in 2014. What was a surprise was the total slate clearing. I've talked about this before, but not only were there like the handwriting on the wall, but Lucasfilm had told us flat out, maybe going back to 2012, but certainly by 2013, although you could go back to 2008 with Clone Wars and realize that something was changing, right? And by that I mean like not just like fans' reaction to the show, but like things that like Luke, like Leland Chi and stuff was hearing from fans and responding to, right? About how like, yeah, don't worry, we know we need to get some things back on track and stuff like that, continuity wise, whatever. You started to wonder, oh gosh, like is something afoot? But I think it was at least 2013 when Lucasfilm explicitly said that they were putting a story group together to consider the fate of the future of the direction of the expanded universe storyline, right? So what that meant was, in ways that, as in previous times, they had occasionally revamped the way they thought of canon continuity. They'd done it around 2000. They'd done it before. Folks forget what happened in 2014 in a way from I think, one perspective of Lucasfilm's sort of point of view was just one of a number of different sort of like continuity reshuffles they'd done. This just happened to be the most complete. You know, in 2000, when Leland Chi came around and put together the holocron to sort of make life a little easier for the licensees to sort of make sense and make it easier for Lucasfilm licensing to provide oversight of the licensees. Prior to that, what canon was and what continuity meant at Lucasfilm was like really black and white. Basically, like if something didn't like make sense in larger continuity, they had two lists. It's this simple. This was canon, this wasn't, you know? So Jedi Prince seemed to now contradict Courtship of Princess Leia based on what was, you know, the public facing sort of like publicly available sort of versions of the stories we had, even though we knew that Jedi Prince was supposed to go on and sort of like say something that would in the end have not contradicted Courtship. So Jedi Prince for a while was non-canon. Well, then 2000 comes along, Holocron's invented, Leland Shee's there to sort of reorganize this stuff, to start slotting all the individual elements from every story into this hierarchy of canon, right? Okay, it's like, okay, well, to the extent that this one piece maybe for the time being doesn't make sense, this one element of Jedi Prince is now S canon, but the rest is C canon for all these sort of blah, blah, blah. We thought that the story group was coming and been told in 2013-ish, at least, you know, that something that was going to happen again. I've made this argument before on other videos that while it was a total shock that they wiped the slate clean in April 25th, 2014, I actually think it's a good thing because it's what's made it in principle possible for there to be a continuation of EU along a parallel path. What we thought was going to happen, we were going to go back to a situation where it's going to be like, okay, you know, going forward, we got the new films, and the new films are probably going to have to override, you know, this quarter of this NJO story and a little bit of that, right? So some of this stuff would have like retroactively sort of like become infinities or S-canon or something, right? It was going to be really messy. It's what the hierarchy was always what allowed new types of stories to be told, right? And allow the older stories to then find retcons to work their way back up to C canon. Long story short, yes, there were signs, both because of what they were telling us and a lot of other things. And I think post 2014, I think you can look back and see a lot of other signs that we weren't aware of at the time that make sense now, right? Again, like I think the Filoni Clone Wars poses like a really huge challenge. Whatever you think about the show, whatever you think about how well some of it could work better than maybe most people think in terms of continuity, it was clearly the case that something inside Lucasfilm, and maybe it was just Chi himself, had just stopped like fighting, right, to make this all make sense in a way that almost like makes you think, oh, maybe like they'd been thinking about this all the way back then. Come to find out, you know, you again go back to 2006 article on StarWars.com where they actually openly sort of debate whether or not the EU continuity should be rebooted, and it's like 50-50. Like insiders basically saying, don't do this. Like the only reason I read the EU is because it's what comes after the films. If you reboot this, I won't buy another book ever again. And other folks like Pablo saying, yeah, like, yeah, go for it. Like I'm a big advocate of this, like end it. You know what I mean? So it's like, wow, fascinating. But yeah, they told us. And actually that's the extent to which this little movement inside this fandom, inside the larger Star Wars fandom to continue Legends, actually it precedes 2014. You know, there were, and you can still find the remnants of this, groups I was involved in on Facebook. Like, I don't think the pages have come down and stuff. It was like basically like early movements to preserve the expanded universe, preserve it from what we thought were going to be sort of like little, you know, tweaks here and there. So yeah, it goes way back. Oh yes, and of course, how could I forget? That I think, yeah, one of the most explicit things was that other thing they tried to pull off at Dark Horse, the Brian Wood, which was promoted as a soft reboot, was promoted as a story to be told just after A New Hope, as if The New Hope was the only thing in the expanded universe. And what's really interesting about that is you can compare over the course of a couple of weeks how quickly they sort of like they reworked the marketing. I mean, it was sold as a reboot. And in that sense, at least you could technically read it. You could call it Infinities, even if it didn't have an Infinities label on it or something, right? Or you could call it as canon, whatever. But they sold it that way, and I think there was such a backlash. You can see, like, the weeks after that promo, then editor at Dark Horse come back and saying, that's not what I meant. I just meant blah, blah, blah. We just mean to say that it's something that anyone without deep knowledge of EU can come and enjoy. But that's not what they said at first. So that's another thing you look back at now, and you're kind of like, yeah, like there was something really, really weird going on. You know, this is really funny. I've heard this. This is hilarious. I've heard this rumor a lot. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. There's a lot of rumors too. There's a lot of people who think I have escaped from Dagu too. I don't know. I don't know where these rumors come from. Yeah, I would join that fight for sure, and I think that that's what was neat about the Superman Rebirth stuff is it kind of did, it kind of did bring some of it back, and I just feel like comics is in such a weird place. DC's in such a weird place now. I don't know what we're gonna do. You occasionally get some little things kind of set, at least with like the same Phil. I think Robert Venditti's done a really good job of sort of writing in a way that feels pre New 52. Apparently, there's going to be like a kind of like a 30th anniversary Jurgens led story, sort of like revisiting like the death of Superman and stuff. Again, I'm clearly very Superman focused, but I know I wish we could go back. I mean, DC Comics is in such a weird place. I'd even go back to New 52 stuff in a number of cases, right? But I really got to get caught up. Yeah, all that stuff, right? I love it. I love that. I love trying to make those connections. Oh no, that's an interesting question. Let me look into that. Let me look into that. Maybe next time I do a stream, I can say more about that. That's great. I started this stream 2 hours ago talking about how I think if there's any hope for the EU in general, it's up to younger fans finding this stuff and enjoying it. And so thank you for finding it and enjoying it and for sharing that. I appreciate that. I hope there are many more people like you, and I know there are. Okay, well, I agree with you here, and I think that was the very bitter pill I had to swallow in order to sort of get to finally enjoy like later Justice League stories in the New 52. Again, I think the last like year run is fantastic and builds with the Dark Side War that then reboots you into Rebirth and stuff. But yeah, listen, I objectively don't think Cyborg's the most interesting character. I think I much prefer the old Teen Titans, which is a great team comic, like in the early '80s run. For folks who don't know about it, but yeah, like the decision to stick him there just makes no sense. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, because like I'm a huge Martian Manhunter fan, and he's supposed to be in the Justice League, right? He's supposed to be a founding member, in addition to a number of other people who should be there too. But look, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to Star Wars and comics. I mean, if I had my magic wand, there'd be a regular like Hawkman series, there'd be a Martian Manhunter series, there'd be like a Firestorm series. I mean, I'm just yeah. I mean, I guess you could argue that. Yeah, that's fair. I've never heard that before. I've never heard that. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about where you've heard that. I have never once heard that. And what fandoms is he controversial in? That's really interesting. I've just never heard. I guess I've never heard either of that. But someday he might make that available. From what I understand, he is aware that that there's a fandom that wants to read it, and so that's the good news. So I think he just needs to. Still, obviously, totally up to him. I mean, people talk about how that's how Lucas Amata released that book, or Del Rey, right? But, and I'm not giving legal advice here, but look, at some point, if the company that commissioned him to put this thing together isn't going to do anything with it, I'm not saying he can monetize it. I'm not offering legal advice, but at some point, it's like maybe he'll finally recognize that like actually the only way for his art to actually be sort of enjoyed, right, is to set it free. So who knows? Hopefully that'll happen someday on a wider scale. Be great. Is that right? I had no idea. It's funny. I've followed some EU authors to other other franchises. Never his. That's really interesting. I do too, Lance. And I've got good news and bad news here. The bad news is you'll never get it. And I hope by that you mean like the NJO Nightfall, the canceled Nightfall trilogy, and not like the Batman stuff. Since the Batman Nightfall, because we're talking about DC here too a little bit. But from what I've heard, we know it's unrecoverable. Like the author, whatever he had of it, it's gone. So it's a good news, bad news thing in a weird way, right? It's like the bad news is we'll never get it, at least whatever it was that we had of it at the time. The good news is we have closure, right? We can kind of stop looking for that, and I think that's important at this point. It's like there's some things like there's the Margaret Weiss novel that we know is gone, so it's gone. We know it's gone, right? Occasionally, though, the really cool thing is that there are some things out there that were canceled or whatever, stopped midstream, that we thought were gone, that like we might have snippets of. So there's definitely more coming down the pike. That's the good news. Maybe. You never know. You never know. It's funny. I don't know. All these rumors. It's so funny. Yeah, me too. Oh yeah, me too. And it's, I remember, look, I get it. Look, I don't know how to put this. Like, that's a lot to read, right? The NJO is a lot to read. I'll just never forget one time. Back in the days when like, this was like post 2014. I mean, every second you logged on to social media, you were being inundated with like new canon talking points, right? About how everything old was crappy or whatever, right? And I just remember in a long list of things, I remember the weakest critique I used to hear is they'd be like, oh, the NJO was too long. It's like, too long. I mean, there's canceled books that we're dying to sort of see more of, right? Give us an outline, give us a table of contents, give us anything, give us more, keep going, right? It's too long. You know, that was crazy, right? So, oh my gosh, I got so burned there. For folks who remember the time that Noah, he got me. He legit got me. He made me think this was a real thing. I don't know. He got me good. Absolutely. I know that was sort of a sad consolation prize, right? I know we got it late, and oh well. And weird critique too. Like even the artwork's odd like that. Like I mean, like you know, somewhere I've got like and I forget what it's from. It must be from one of the covers. I forget off the top of my head, but I've got like this gigantic promo poster for Invasion. It doesn't even look like Luke on it. It's just the whole thing is so weird. I know, horrible consolation prize. Now that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Fair enough. So you don't want more, but you at least you agree that it like maybe shouldn't have been less, right? So it did what it needed to do. Yep, for sure. That's always going to be a weird thing. And I forget now. I know there was a controversy about this a while ago, like some of the treatments that were available online. I think some of which like came down now. It's always going to be weird. There's that weird element from some of those TCW shows of like stuff that we could have seen, but like just they were mid development, but now they're gone for good. Really weird. That's how I keep the mystique. That's what keeps you guys coming back for more. So I'm sorry. It's all part of the show. So anyway. Yeah, right. Well, I guess technically, I mean, at least during that part of it, right, you get a little bit of evasion stuff. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else really. Yeah, it's really a shame. It's a huge missed opportunity not to do more sort of like multimedia stuff at the time. I totally agree. Yeah. Been a long time since I thought about it. I'm so sorry. You've got all these great questions. I don't have much on the spot. I need to think about it again, but I remember I want to look into it. I want to see. I just remember there being something about them. Let me go back and check all that out. Interesting. I like it. I want to hear more about that. Yeah, I do. I do, and it's a good question. I and I, a quick related aside. I mean, the only thing I've gotten more hate from online for being an EU fan is from EU fans because I regard the Clone Wars, for better or worse, as part of the pre 2014 Star Wars world, right? And that doesn't mean that I like every episode. Doesn't mean that I like Filoni's sort of like narrative choices and impact on the Star Wars universe. Doesn't mean any number of things about whether I believe it fits in the continuity or canon or whether it was right. But no, I do. I mean, I obviously collected all the. I've got all the DVDs. I got the Blu-ray re-releases. I've got the promos related to it. I've got every tie-in graphic novel, book, so on and so forth, right? And the promos related to those. So yeah, for me, it really is it's an all-in kind of a thing, for better or worse, right? Recognizing that the Filoni Clone Wars is problematic, to say the least. The only thing that for a long time I was a little iffy about is the only thing I was ever really iffy about promo-wise holding on to, or anything related to like officially sort of announced like Infinities related things, right? So like Dark Horse put out a bunch of promo posters for the Tales comics and things like that, including stuff related to the Dark Horse Brian Wood run. I did a video about this recently. One of my more recent acquisitions was to finally just simply pony up and get a couple of the promo posters related to the Brian Wood run, which is at best as canon. In reality, probably Infinities. And I just said, you know what, I'm too much of a completist. And same thing with the Tales stuff too. I've got that as well. But yeah, when it comes to Filoni, I do. And I think I've shown some of that stuff off more recently. Like I've got some promo posters. I mean, actually, I think there's some cool things like related to the Filoni Clone War comic digest, some promos related to that, promo posters and stuff like that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot. But there's one big caveat, and anything that relates to like Clone Wars obviously was like a movie release first, right? Where they kind of strung together some episodes. I have the movie poster. That's it. I didn't really go too much more into that, and kind of and partially because it's just Clone Wars and it's not my favorite thing, right? But also because for whatever reason, I have this weird thing about like when it comes to the original 6 movies, I think I've said this recently on a video or stream or something. I really don't collect much about the movies. I collect stuff from the EU. And so, because when you kind of, and this is partially more of like a collecting thing that is like a perspective on like the EU itself or something. When you start talking about collecting in the context of like movie stuff, that's a whole different beast. I just haven't gone there. So I have posters from all the 6 films. That's about it, but. All right. I would love to see it, Force Unleashed 3 novel. I would absolutely love it. It would be on the top of my list. Absolute top of my list. If there were like 3 things I could continue, I want that. I want something bridging the gap between Crucible and Legacy. And the 3rd volume of Science Adventures. And with that, folks, thank you so much for joining. Been 2 hours. Thank you again. I am going to say goodnight. All right, bye-bye.